All right. Thank you all for coming. I'm Gabriel Kamener. I'm the information manager for the Florida Coastal Everglades LTER program. And so I'm going to be presenting on an introduction to data management and publication at FCE. So, just an overview. First, we're going to review sharing of LTER network data, the EDI data repository, and the FCE data catalog, citing data, and then we're going to go through best practices on data and project management, formatting data, describing metadata, and then we'll finish with preparing for publication with EasyEML. So the LTER network is ongoing since 1980 and is funded by the NSF. Sharing of data across the network enables new science, supports open science and reproducibility, and funders and journal publishers often require data sets to be published in a recognized data repository. And so the FCE program adheres to the LTER network data release policy. And basically that means that data must be made available in a community accepted data repository with as few restrictions as possible on a non-discriminatory basis. And so there are two types of LTER data. Type 1 data are to be released to the general public according to the terms of the General Data Use Agreement from the last slide, within 2 years from their collection and no later than the publication of the main findings from the data set. There are also type 2 data. Those are basically data that are considered to be exceptional and should be rare in occurrence. And they are released to restricted audiences according to terms specified by the owners of the data. FCE publishes type 1 data. Graduate student data needs to generally be, you need to submit a complete data set and along with metadata to the FCE information manager before graduation. And generally, before publishing a data set, you need to meet with the IM at least 2 months before you need to publish the data. Sometimes there's a number of iterative steps that need to be gone through in order to get the data and metadata into a state that is high quality and ready to publish. And it's especially important to go through all those steps because you will need a citation for the data set, saying a manuscript that you'll be publishing in a journal, and you need that, get the data published in order to get the DOI. And FCE primarily publishes data in the Environmental Data Initiative data repository, and the EDI is funded by the NSF. The repository provides long-term data security, long-term data accessibility, data integrity, data discovery, and citable digital object identifiers or DOIs for data sets, which is what I mentioned you will need when citing data in a paper. And data in the EDI data repository can be accessed through the EDI data portal, which is a user-friendly interface for the repository. And there are currently more than 10,300 searchable unique data packages in the EDI data repository. And the portal provides advanced search functionality for all of these data sets, including FCE data. And if you want to search specifically through FCE data, you can find those data in our FCE data catalog. And basically this kind of focuses in on just FCE data sets that are in the EDI data repository. And you can easily search the data catalog from the FCE website. And so you can search by keywords, the author of the data sets, and also by the 5 core LTER core research areas. Additionally, you can search via the geospatial search feature that's featured on the right. You can pan and zoom and then filter your search results that way. And so steps to publish in the EDI data repository generally you'll want to review the FCE data page first, and contact me about your data, whether they're tabular, model code, imagery, or something else. We'll also discuss required metadata, how to format your data set, and I'll issue you an FCE dataset ID that we'll use to organize your submission and track it. And you'll want to start this process again at least 2 months before you need to publish your data. And after going through those steps, you'll then enter data and metadata into EasyEML, and we will review the package. You'll review the package with the FCE IM, and we will then move on to publishing in the EDI repository once everything looks good to go. And so this is just an example data set that was published in 2024. And so on the left is the full citation with the DOI. And this data package, for instance, has 9 data files in it. And I want to just show what this full citation looks like, because the following year, the data package was cited. And I just want to provide an example of how how citing data packages should look in a manuscript when possible. You'll want to include the full citations with the DOIs in your references, and then you would ideally cite those references in a data availability statement, and also include the DOI links in that statement. And so this is just an example of a paper that was published last year that cited that data set from the previous slide. Next, we're going to move into best practices in data management. And Briney et al. 2020 really summarizes it well. Well-managed data is a benefit to any researcher as it requires less digging to find, less effort to understand, and less processing to prepare for collaboration, reuse, and sharing. And so one of the just most fundamental things is really just getting back to file organization. So you want to plan and use a folder structure that's going to make sense for your project. You want to use consistent file names throughout your project. You want to keep your raw data separate from your analysis files. And you want to use file versioning of some form. It could be something as simple as appending and updating the current date when a file was last revised to the end of that file name. And more advanced options include Git or GitHub for file versioning over time. You want to back up your data. You want at least 3 copies of your data in 2 geographically separate locations. And you want to have them on more than one type of storage device. You don't want all of your data just on your laptop. If something happens to it, then you're going to be in a crunch if you don't have it backed up elsewhere. You want to write a living data management document. And this will just cover all of the important details of your project. And you'll keep it in one place. And it's going to be relatively short. It can be just a page or 2. It doesn't need to be a long, detailed document, at least not initially. And you would update that as your research project evolves. And this will not only help you, but also your collaborators. And so these skills, these fundamental best practices are covered in Briney et al. 2020, as well as the associated workbook. And I recommend folks who aren't already familiar with research data management to check these resources out. And it's also a good thing to brush up on occasion if you haven't maybe worked with some of these skills before. And then project management in RStudio. So a lot of ecologists tend to use R and RStudio. And so I just want to illustrate how project management works in the case of RStudio, and how it helps make data projects run smoother. And so some of the advantages of RStudio and RStudio projects is when you're using an RStudio project, it automatically sets the working directory for your project. It's portable. It's collaborator friendly. And when I say portable and collaborator friendly, that means you could zip up your project. You could then email it to your collaborator or advisor. They could unzip it, and they would ideally be able to run your code on their computer. Our Studio Projects also supports version control with Git and GitHub. It can aid reproducibility with the rend package. And it can also integrate with GitHub Copilot. I've got the points that I'm going to be covering in this presentation highlighted in bold here. The version control with Git and GitHub and the rend package could be their own workshops on their own. So setting up an RStudio project basically starts by starting RStudio and then going through these steps listed here, which and this instructional is adapted from data carpentry lesson that's linked at the bottom of the slide. So you would create your project, you create your folders for your data with a raw data subfolder, one for your intermediate data and one for your final data. You would also have a folder for R scripts and figures in your working directory. And then finally, you place your raw data files and script files into their respective folders. And so an RStudio project would look something like this. We have the .rproj file that organizes your project, a README file that would provide documentation on how a user should use the project, the data folder, folder for figures, and folder for R scripts. And so within the data folder, you've got the raw, intermediate, and final subfolders. And this is just kind of to illustrate the portability aspect of it. An R script without an RStudio project generally are needing to specify a full file path to where the data or files you're reading in are. And because of that, it's not really portable. If you move it to maybe from your desktop to your laptop, well, now the files might not be in the same place. If you share it with a collaborator, their computer's probably not mapped the same way yours is. So those file paths will break and they will need to be manually edited in order to work again. But if you're using an RStudio project, then the file paths are always relative to the My Project folder in this illustrated case, and the project becomes portable. You can zip up everything and share it with your collaborator or move it from one computer to another, and the file paths will still work. And additionally, if you have an RStudio project set up, you can utilize GitHub Copilot. And first, I just want to kind of cover, so GitHub Copilot is generative AI to help code. And I just want to kind of cover what Cooper et al. 2025, and that's the Guide to Reproducible Code from the British Ecological Society. And I liked the way they kind of summarized how any use of AI in coding or research should be handled if it is used. And so it should be transparent, accountable, and acknowledged. And so you're going to want to check the editorial policies of journals before submission and ensure you're using the most up-to-date guidance before you attempt to use AI for anything research related. You should also check with your advisor and institution before using generative AI for anything research related. Having said that, you also need to ideally have a good understanding of the type of coding and that you're going to be doing and the data you'll be working with in order to assess any results that you are getting from AI code completion or anything else that you're using it for when coding. And so following data management best practices will enable better use of tools like GitHub Copilot. If your project is organized in a predictable manner, you're providing decent documentation or easily understandable documentation along with your code as comments, that will help tools like GitHub Copilot produce better results. And so I just want to highlight a couple of, I'm not going to get too much into the generative AI in this presentation. That's another topic that could be covered in its own presentation workshop. But I do want to highlight a couple of generative AI programming resources that were recently featured during an LTER Information Managers Monthly meeting. And so those have some very helpful instructionals for setting up tools like GitHub Copilot in RStudio, as well as other AI assistants in positron coding environment and VS Code. So I recommend checking out both of these resources if you are interested in learning more about how folks and the LTER network are looking at generative AI in relation to coding. I'm going to shift gears and get to formatting data. And so tidy is the goal. Basically, we want to have each variable forming its own column, and each observation should be its own row. Each cell should have just a single value in it, single measurement. And so what you basically want to have in a tabular data file is one rectangle of data with no blank columns or rows and no blank cells. And you want to have one data type per column, one value per cell, and you want to use simple headers with no spaces and no special characters. And so the table up top is one we would want to try to avoid. And the one at the bottom is formatted in a tidy format. You also want to format your dates as 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. That's the standard that FCE requires when publishing data with dates. And you want to use consistent categorical variable codes in those types of columns. So just want to say, so in that top right of the top table here, we have the sex column, it's a lowercase m, uppercase f, and then male fully spelled out. So you'd want to standardize that to just two variables, most likely, whether it be m and f, and they'd be the same capitalization as well to ensure consistency. And you want to avoid calculations or graphs in your raw data files or data that you plan to publish. Finally, don't highlight cells or embed comments. You ideally would set up an additional column just to enter comments. And one of the reasons you don't want to highlight cells is when the data get published eventually, they're going to get published as CSV files. And those are basically just plain text files that don't retain the highlighted formatting. So that information will get lost when you go to publish it. It's also not always easy to tell what the highlighting means. So you definitely want to have a comment column to document any issues with any rows of data. And as you update your files, your data files, you want to document any changes you make to them over time and version them as you change them. So that way, if you make a mistake as you're updating them, you can go back and revert to an earlier version and work from there. And lastly, you want to store metadata in a separate sheet or file. And so what are metadata? Metadata are basically data about data. They document the who, what, why, where, and when of your data. And reasons to use metadata, they help keep track of important details about the data. They're required to publish data sets in places like the Environmental Data Initiative's data repository. They increase the findability and usability of your published data as well. And so documenting metadata includes data table information, also known as a data dictionary, the title of your data set, an abstract for your data set. And that abstract should be different from say an associated manuscript, the data set stands alone and should have its own abstract. Any parties responsible for creation of the data set, methods of how the data were collected, intellectual rights of the data, keywords that help describe the data set for keyword searches, geographic, temporal, and taxonomic coverage as well. So folks can find your data through geographic searches by time or by taxa they might be interested in and finding data about. Information about non-tabular data should also be included if applicable, and will vary by project. Project funding should be documented, and permit information should also be included if applicable. And so just first, that data dictionary that I mentioned, this is something you ideally create as early as possible to document what's in every column of your data table. And so it'll describe all the variables from starting with the column name, the definition of what's in that column, the type of variable in that column, units if applicable, how precise those data are. Are they precise to 1 decimal place, 3 decimal places? What the meanings of any categorical codes are, how the date and time data are formatted, defining missing value codes, and what the missing value codes are and what they mean. And so the data set title should be descriptive, including the what, where, and when about the data set. You do not want to use the manuscript title. The data set is its own unique entity. The abstract should describe who, what, why, where, and when of the data set in more detail. And again, because this is a unique entity, it's separate from your manuscript. You do not generally include the results or conclusions from your study. That information is to be described in associated manuscript. You'll want to describe your methods in detail to answer any questions someone might have about your data set. And then you also want to include, if you cite any references in your methods, you want to include a full reference list. So that way it's easy to identify which references you are citing in your methods. So intellectual rights, FCE uses the Creative Commons CC BY license, and that's by default on all of our data sets. Documenting metadata. So keywords, you want to ideally, when possible, source them from the LTER controlled vocabulary. And geographic coverage should include coordinates in decimal degrees for publishing. Temporal coverage documents when the data were collected, not when you're publishing the data. And you'll format the temporal coverage, again, as the standard 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, separated by dashes, or 4-digit year. Taxonomic coverage, it's important to check the spelling of any taxonomic names that you're entering. That's one of the most common issues that come up with entering taxonomic metadata. Information about non-tabular data entities can include metadata about model code, geospatial, imagery, or other data entities. And project funding is basically information about funding of the data collection. And then permits covers any permits that are required for the data collection. And so the timing importance of quality metadata, it's really important for future you to begin with. It's important for the discovery and reuse of your published data. The LTER network and EDI use the ecological metadata language to document quality metadata. And so metadata should be described throughout the research lifecycle. you want to describe as much as possible in early stages, and you want to regularly add and update metadata throughout the life cycle of your data. And so EasyEML's role in data publishing, FCE now uses this tool for managing the drafting and editing of all of our data set metadata now. And so it's a form-based web interface to create and edit structured metadata in EML. It can utilize pre-filled FCE templates. It saves as you go. You can quality check your data and metadata as well. And so the product that it produces is it's a data package, which is basically your data plus your metadata all in one package. And so in EasyEML, you can create metadata for tables and other data entities. And so you can also run quality checks on the data and metadata. And so EasyEML will provide feedback on potential showstoppers or errors and points to investigate, which come up as warnings. And so errors come up as red in EasyEML, and warnings will come up in yellow. And so just as an example, on this slide, the data file had an issue with the formatting of the date time. It was not formatted as it was defined in the metadata. And same issue, so both the dates had an issue and the time had an issue. And so it reports those as errors and lists which rows and which tables they're in. EasyEML can also fetch existing packages from EDI to facilitate updates. And so we now use this to update all of our ongoing data packages. And so you can also preview how your package will look on the EDI data portal as you go through the process of drafting it. And so this is just an example of how that might look. The very top portion of it. Anyway, there's a lot more metadata that you'll be able to go through and review in this preview. Everything from that abstract all the way down to the methods, the data table metadata, the keywords, and everything else that you've entered through EasyEML. And so just to review submitting your data to the FCE-IM, first, you want to review the FCE data page. Start this process, again, at least 2 months before you need to publish your data. Then contact the FCE-IM to review your data and to receive an FCE dataset ID. Finally, I'll send you an EasyEML collaboration invite, and you can then start entering the data and metadata into EasyEML. When you are finished doing that, you'll email me and I'll review your metadata, provide you feedback. Usually, we go through an iterative process of revising, and then once the data package is looking good, then we publish it in the EDI data repository. And so IM support at FCE includes a section on the FCE data page, and there is not only information management support information provided there, but links to additional resources on best practices. And I'm available for weekly office hours on every Thursday from 2 to 7 p.m. Well, just about every Thursday. And a typical week, that's where I'll be and the times I'm available. I also provide support at FCE student think tank events. And I'm available by email or appointment. So whether that's in person or on Zoom. So feel free to reach out, come by during office hours, shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you out with your data and metadata. And these are just some of the resources and references I've covered throughout the presentation, as well as the initial 4 links or so linked to FCE resources, including the GitHub repository where I've I've published this presentation and some example metadata documents, as well as some guidance for data submissions. Questions and discussion.
Hi, Gabe. Thank you. I have a question
Yes.
about the tidy data aspect of things. So when you have let's a bunch of different categories of data, does it matter for when you publish your data for readability if you have your categories on the row or if you have them on the column, like column header?
So for your categories, so I'll just go back to the example of let's say you have site name and then you have 5 different, so that's your column name.
Hmm.
And then you have 5 different site codes. So those codes would appear as values within that column, and then you would have metadata that define what each of those codes mean in a separate. It would be in your metadata. Does that answer your question?
I think I was asking a different question, could you because you know how in R you can pivot your data tables?
Mhm.
So technically does it matter the orientation of your data if you have it in long or wide format for or I guess maybe I'm not being clear. I'm
So
sorry.
that's an excellent question. I think I better understand it. So just for instance, if you have let's say you have species count data, um, if it's in a long form, then you would have one column for the taxon name, and you would have another column for the number of that you counted or something like that. So in that long form, you would have less column metadata to document actually, but then you would have an associated ideally you would have an associated file that has definitions for all of the codes, because often when data are so I know in your case you're working with diatoms, and you might have hundreds of species. So if you had that in a wide format, for every slide, you would have, if you had a column for your each individual taxon, you would have to define every one of those columns. But if you have it in that long form where you have many fewer columns, then you would just need to define what's in that taxon column, and you could then have a separate file that lists all the definitions for all of your codes. So that's one of those cases where, yeah, if you've got more than 5 or 6 codes, then you have a whole separate file, ideally to define all of them.
Thanks, Gabe.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Gabe.
Adrian?
Adi
I,
or Adian.
yeah.
What if your data is sort of like a compilation, like a meta-analysis of other people's data?
So, um, so there's a number of factors that go into that, but so let's say you have a synthesized data, a tabular data file of data that's synthesized from a number of source data sets. So when you go to publish a data package like that, you would ideally include in the methods. EasyEML has a way to actually to document this nicely, but basically documenting the data provenance. Where did the source data come from? And so, yeah, you would document that in the methods of your metadata.
Thanks.
Yep. Anyone else? Any questions or points of discussion? Um, oh, I see a text comment or a comment. Do you have any comments on how to organize GIS data files? That I don't see nearly as many of those submitted, and so that can vary on a case by case basis. So I'd have to kind of again look at that on a case by case basis. Sorry, I can't be more specific. Okay, if there's no more questions, we can wrap up. Thank you all so much for attending, and feel free to reach out
Thanks, Gabe. Have a good day.
to Bella.